it's meaningful to me that I was able to get the word out to more people. Because if it's only in Irvine, it's important. If every rabbi gets out the word to his congregation all together, it's great. There's only one problem. None of the rabbis say it. They're all afraid. Well, Reform and conservative rabbis forget about it. And the Orthodox rabbis are terrified to tell you what's on their minds. They're terrified. All they need is one of their major donors who doesn't agree and take away the sponsorship of a building or a kiddush, and they're fired. So rabbis are terrified to speak the truth. Comes out when we have a convention of the Rabbinical Council of America, that's like 3 days a year where rabbis get to talk the truth with each other. The rest of it, not God forbid that they lie. They just keep everything private. Rabbi, where do you stand on this? It's very complicated. What do you think about the prisoner deal? I'm so thrilled that hostages have come home. I'm very concerned that 1,000 murderers are. So was it a good deal? I'm so thrilled that the prisoners are coming home. I'm so deeply concerned that the murderers are going free. I understand, Rabbi. You have a wonderful, but was it a good deal? I'm so thrilled the prisoners are coming home. I'm so concerned that the murderers are going loose. You can't get a rabbi to tell you the truth. They're all afraid. And so if they all were doing what I do to 15 people in Irvine, it would be okay. But no one's doing it. So it means a lot to me that we reached 1,500 people. And the comments I get back, to hear the truth, to hear a rabbi that speaks the truth. But I devoted my kishkas, my guts to this last week, and I needed to move away from this subject today. I want to get away from the captives, and I know if you take that soundbite out of, I want to get away from the discussion of the captives and the ransom, but our class is on ethics and values concerning Jews at war. And so I want to take us somewhere very different, an excursion within the topic that unto itself is a class. Maybe it'll go two classes. I think you're going to find it really interesting. And it should be discussed. It's a halakhah. Here we go. So to shift gears, ethics and values of Jews at war. The Torah tells us we're not allowed to go to Egypt. Whoa. Egypt is part of Jewish ethics and values of war. Guess who started the 1948 war that attempted to crush Israel when she declared independence? Egypt. Gamal Abdel Nasser. Who started the 1956 war, the 4-day, 100-hour war? Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt. Who started the 1967 war, 6-day war? Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt. Depression, Syria, Jordan. It was in Egypt. Who started the 1973 war? Sadat of Egypt. Israel's first 4 wars for its first 25 years, all was started by Egypt. So there's a history going. And the halakhah anticipated in Torah times, God said, we're not allowed to go to Egypt, not allowed to set foot in Egypt. It's a halakhah. You're not allowed to set foot in Egypt. Not allowed to set foot. I heard that Rambam had moved to Egypt. I mean, Israelis visit Egypt. Begin went to Egypt to make a deal. The media came down to Egypt to cover the deal. Jews go to Egypt now. What does that mean you can't go to Egypt? Let's learn the halakhah. We'll get in as much as we can today. And as long as Netanyahu does not make any other crazy capitulations, we'll continue next week with this subject, the Jews and Egypt. And the forbidden halakhah, forbidden to go to Egypt, and an understanding of how it can be the Jews do go to Egypt, and that the halakhah allows it. We're going to go through the Chumash, we're going to go through the Gemara, we're going to go through medieval commentaries, we're going to go to the modern time in Rav HaChacham Harav Avadia Yosef. And we're going to have a lot of learning on this subject. Again, a lot of us don't know about Egypt. What has happened is the Arabs came up with something smart, really smart. I don't think they even knew what they were doing. I think they just lucked into it. After making so many wars with Israel unsuccessfully, 48, 56, 67, 73, never being able to defeat Israel, he actually came up with a brilliant idea. Create terrorist organizations as their satellites and let the terrorists fight. If they fight, Israel wipes out their air forces. Israel wipes out their armies, their tanks, and sets them back 20 years. They can't even threaten other countries. Israel sets Egypt back so much they can't even fight Libya. Israel attacks Syria so much they can't threaten Turkey. Israel sets back Jordan so much they can't stand up to Iraq. So they all got smart and each one set up their own terrorist group. The PLO, Fatah in Judea, Samaria, as the accessories of Jordan, Hamas in Gaza as the accessories of Egypt, and Hezbollah as the accessories of Lebanon and Syria. That way they can fight. Israel suffers as many or more casualties, but has to go to war against them. And Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, we said them, Jordan, nobody gets bombed. They all come out clean. And they let the terrorists drop dead. In fact, what helped take down Hezbollah is that Israel finally decided, screw this, we're going to bomb Syria also. Next thing you knew, Assad was out of business. And that was the end of that. And Israel started to bomb Beirut. So then Beirut elected a new president who's anti-Hezbollah, because now it's hitting Beirut. That wasn't supposed to happen. The plan is you go after Hezbollah. That's our plan. You leave us alone. So that's what went on for 30 years or whatever. And then finally Israel went ahead and bombed Beirut and Damascus. End of Hezbollah. And so on and so forth. This is very complicated. And it entails learning history and a lot of history. So let's get down to action. Thank you for being here. Again, I don't think I can cover this all in one class. Mirz Hashem 2, Ethics and Values of Jews at Wartime, the halakhah of dealing with our enemy, Egypt. And if you think there's peace now with Egypt, since the 1977 agreement between Sadat and Begin, there is a cold peace, like there was a Cold War. There really is al-Sisi, the head of Egypt. There's no threat of war during the whole garbage going on. There's no direct threat of war. And yet Egypt brings motions despite their peace agreement. Sadat with Begin, al-Sisi brings motions in the United Nations to condemn Israel and to demand that Israel pull out of Hamas Gaza. And they seal the border of the south of Gaza. They won't, when people talk about that Gaza is the biggest open air prison in the world, the people can't get out because Israel won't let them out in the north, so let them go out in the south. Egypt won't let them out into Egypt. And that's partly because Egypt doesn't want them. No Arab country wants them. And number two, Egypt adds to our problems. And Egypt added to the problems of Rafiah. When Netanyahu said we're going to go into Rafiah, and Egypt said, no, you're not, because that's the border with Egypt. We want you to stay away from it. And that added to the problems with Biden and Harris. And so Egypt is no mitzvah. They're not our friend. They're not our enemy right now. And there is a cold peace. They stay out of this. And that was almost not possible because when the vicious, evil, toxic Obama was president of the United States, may God curse him in his lifetime and after his lifetime. When Obama was president of the United States, he gave his blessing to the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood to become the head. They overthrew Mubarak, who had succeeded Sadat. And Mubarak was like al-Sisi. Israel could deal with him. And Mubarak honored the agreement with Begin. And then there was the Arab Spring, which was like an Arab nightmare. And the Muslim Brotherhood took over. And really, that's a terrorist movement. And God forbid what they were going to do to Israel, or try. And Obama gave them blessings. And thank God there was an internal revolution within Egypt that overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood and brought al-Sisi to power. And Israel supported them secretly. And al-Sisi, that's part of the reason he's okay with Israel. He's opposed to Israel, but not as bad. A final word just to change my mood, and then we get into it. Henny Youngman told this story. Henny Youngman was a comedian in the Catskills back in the 60s and 70s. I heard this on the Ed Sullivan Show. He tells the story that Israel sent 2 members of the Mossad to assassinate Gamal Abdel Nasser, to put an end to Nasser's anti-Semitism and constantly starting war. So 2 members of the Mossad go to Egypt and they start to track him down. They follow him every day with the plan to assassinate him. And they finally find out every day at 12:17 p.m., like clockwork, every day at 12:17 p.m., he goes to a small Cairo sandwich store and orders a tuna fish sandwich. Every day at 12:17 p.m. And this goes on for a month. They want to be sure. And they pick the day. It's a Tuesday. On Tuesday at 12:17 p.m., they're going to assassinate Gamal Abdel Nasser while he goes for his tuna sandwich. Comes Tuesday, the 2 Mossad guys are hiding behind the bushes, and they're ready for it. They're all armed, and they have their getaway plan. It's 12:15, 12:16, 12:17. Nasser's not there. Never happened before. 12:18, 12:30, 12:45, 1 o'clock, 1:30. And one Mossad guy says to the other, I can't believe it. And the other guy says back, gee, I hope he didn't have an accident. I hope nothing bad happened to him. So anyway, we go forward now. Thank you for being here. We start with halakhah in the Torah. Just a picture of the map. Here's this little blue, Eretz Israel. This is Israel. This little blue. And that's Egypt. Rambam had lived in Spain. And when the Catholic Church took over Spain, we've had our hands full. There was a time that the Muslims were better, that the Arab Muslims were our friends, and the Catholics were our problem. When the Catholics took over Spain and began that process that eventually would lead to the Spanish Inquisition, Jews fled Spain. Where are you going to go? Where are you going to go? Italy? Same problem. Where are you going to go? Jews fled to Egypt. And they lived in Egypt. Rambam lived in Egypt. Later on, of course, you've met Sephardim in Israel, all those Sephardim in Israel. 1950s, 800 years later, the Arabs drove all the Sephardim, mostly from Morocco, and Algerians and Sephardim from all over. Turkish Jews are Sephardic, Greece Jews is considered Sephardic, and of course from Syria and Lebanon. Lebanon is that, and Syria is that, and Iraq, and Jordan, and Iraq, etc., Iranian Jews. So on our border is Egypt. Look how much bigger it is. All right. Sefer Shemot, Perek Yud, chapter 14. The Exodus, the Jews have gotten out, and the Jews are on the brink of being exterminated. They're at the edge of the Red Sea, the Sea of Reeds, Yam Suf, and they have no way out. And the Egyptian army, the chariots and all the soldiers are about to slaughter and exterminate the Jewish people. And there's no way out. And they blame Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, for getting us into this mess. We told you we should have stayed. They said to Moshe, was it for nothing? What, there are no graves in Egypt that you took us out to die in the wilderness? They always followed Moshe lovingly and excitedly when things went well. And when they ran into trouble, they blamed him. That's how it's always been, unfortunately, I guess it's with all people, but we have many of our people like that also. And so that's what you got us into? What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt? Isn't this the thing that we said, leave us alone? Let us be and we'll serve the Egyptians as slaves, for it's better to be slaves to the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. Look what you've done to us. Moshe said to the people, have no fear. Stand by and witness the delivery that Hashem will work for you today. Keywords, ki asher item et Mitzrayim hayom, because the Egyptians and the very Egypt that you're looking upon right now today, lo tosifu lirotam od olam, you will never see them. You are not ever again going to see them. Lo tosifu, you will not again. Lirotam, you will not see them again. Ad olam, forever. Hashem yilachem lachem, God will fight for you. Va'atem tarchishun, and you just remain quiet and watch. And what then happens is the splitting of the sea, and you know the story. So is that simply a comment on now? The rabbis say it's also an halakhah, that you're not allowed to see Egyptians again. What does that mean? You're not allowed to see them on TV? Mitzrayim could mean the people, but that would be Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is the country of Egypt. The way you see Egypt, the country, you will not today, you should not see Egypt again. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. All right. The halakhah that God in Devarim, Yud Zayin, chapter 17, we are commanded, if and when we will appoint a king, when we come into the land of Israel, there are halakhas for the king. And we have learned many of these halakhas in the past, Jewish law, on our Thursday night class, sometimes Tuesday night class in the context of David HaMelech and Shaul HaMelech. And certainly on Thursday nights, we've learned so much about you'll appoint a king that God will appoint from your own people. You're not allowed to have a king of Israel who's not born Jewish, cannot be a convert, certainly cannot be a non-Jew, must be born a Jew under halakhah. Lo tuchal letet alecha ish nachri asher lo achichahu, must be someone born Jewish. Under Bible, obviously nowadays we don't live under Torah law, so we have women kings, prime ministers, and God knows what we have. Some are better and some are useless. And halakhah rak lo yarbelos usim v'lo yashivat amitzrayim. Oh, the king may not have too many horses, and he may not bring the nation back to Egypt. Laman harbotsus, for the purpose of increasing the horses. The greatest horses at that time, the most magnificent horses, were in Egypt. And therefore, even today, there's a breed in Egypt that is, there are certain breeds of horses that are extraordinary. I'm not an expert on horses, but I know, like I spent a year in Kentucky, seriously, in Louisville, where they have the Kentucky Derby, Churchill Downs, and I learned a great deal about horses, seriously. Judge Boggs, for whom I clerked, he wanted us to get into the culture of Kentucky the year we were there to get a feel of the place. So we went and we went to one or two tours of bourbon factories, Maker's Mark and Jim Beam, and I went to a live auction of tobacco and tobacco farm and Churchill Downs. I did not bet on horses, but we went to a race. And there are certain kind of breeds and thoroughbreds and other kinds of breeds. All of us know the famous Budweiser horses in the commercials. And Egyptian horses are exceptional. And a king, with the wealth that the king would have, might very well want to get horses from Egypt, purchase them, and then you need somebody to ride them back to Israel. And the Torah says you're not allowed to send people into Egypt to ride them back, because a Jew, from what we just learned a minute ago about what happened at the Sea of Reeds, that you will not see the Egyptians whom you see today, and Egypt, Mitzrayim, not Mitzrayim, the Egypt that you see today, you will never see again. Therefore, Torah says he's not allowed to send Jews to Egypt, even to ride horses back. Since Hashem has warned you, you must not go back that way again. Lo yarbelus is simple, lo yashiva to Mitzrayim. A Jew is not allowed to go back to Egypt, and the king is not allowed to send him, because Amar lechem lo tusifim lo shuv b'derech hazod. And God in Deuteronomy 28, in Devarim Chavches, even puts a curse. God forbid, God forbid, God forbid, God forbid. The famous Tochacha of Parshat Kitavo. If God forbid the Jewish people shall sin and not abide by the halachot that God commands us, And it's far more than what starts at verse 58, Pasuk Nun Chet. It goes way, way back, and it's horrific. All the sins, all the punishments that God will, God forbid, bring upon the Jews if, God forbid, we do not, as a nation, live by Torah law. And of course, unfortunately, history has shown that we had our share of assimilation and did not always abide by the covenant with God as a nation. And we only have to study Jewish history to know that chapter 28 came true in all its horrors, including the Holocaust. We're at 58. Let me see if there's anything else that rings a bell here. And if not, if I didn't, well, won't take out the time because there's so much to cover. But, all right, well, the enemies will loose against you, put an iron yoke upon your neck. You shall have to serve them in hunger and thirst, naked, lacking everything. You've seen the pictures from the Holocaust. You've seen what they came out of the camps, hunger and thirst, pictures of Jews in the thousands naked. You've seen it. You've seen those pictures. It happened. All these curses shall befall you until you are wiped out. We've seen it. And, okay, let's get to Tachlis, because that could be a class unto itself. So, if you fail to observe faithfully all the terms of this Torah that are written in this book to reverence, revere this honored and awesome name, אם לא תשמור לעשות את כל דברי התורה הזאת, הכתובים בספר הזה ליראת השם הנכבד והנורא הזה, את השם אלוקיך, והפלא השם את מכותך ואת מכות זרעך, מכות גדולות ונאמנות וחלאים רעים ונאמנים. God will even increase, God forbid, the punishments and the plagues he will bring upon you and your offspring, bringing back upon you all the sicknesses of Egypt, diseases that the Western world barely knew. Crazy, just like in the modern time. I'm not saying COVID I absolutely am not even suggesting COVID's part of that. But just that what COVID was in 2020, which was a machla from nowhere, disease that no one knew from. What is this? So there'll be diseases. There'll be terrible diseases, whether it's the bubonic plague of the 1300s, 1348 to 1351, that wiped out 1/3 the population of Europe, and as a result ultimately led to plagues and Holocaust that wiped out 1/3 of the Jews of Europe, and other diseases. Who bring diseases. Who bring upon you other diseases and plagues that are not mentioned, that no one's ever heard of. Again, we're not talking about COVID, but COVID is an example of what I mean. As I'm saying to you, diseases no one knows where it came from. To this day, they don't know. Did it come from a lab in Wuhan? Did it come from, God knows, nobody knows where it came from. There are theories. And it'll leave you a scant few. What happened with the Holocaust? We were left with like just a she'erira pleta. Menachem Begin once said, they did not decimate us, because decimate comes from DEC. DEC is 1/10. December was the 10th month. September is the 7th month. October, Oct 8, November 9, December 10. And there are 2 extra months to throw off that count because they added for Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar. So they threw in later July and August. But decimal is 1/10. Decentennial is the 10th year. Decimate means to wipe out 1/10 of a people. Begin said they did not, famously said they did not decimate us. They tertiated us. They wiped out 1/3 of us, tertiated us. Very famous quote. So that's what happened. We were left scant few after having been numerous as the stars in the skies, etc., etc., etc. And so he's punishing us. He made it just as he delighted in making us prosperous. Now he will delight in causing us to perish, wiping us out, torn from the land, etc., and so on and so forth. Why are we going through this? Because in the course of all the rest of his punishments, he says, God will send you back to Egypt. Pasuk 68, Samachet. That is a curse on the Jewish people, that Jews would go to Egypt. As much as any country outside of Israel is a curse for being in Golah, the exile, nowhere is like the Arutz Israel, the land of Israel. It is an extra curse more than any other country on earth to be sent back to Egypt, even Germany, because Germany is not mentioned in Torah. No other country, Spain, none is mentioned. They're mentioned indirectly some ways. Nothing is mentioned like Egypt. Germany and Spain, there are references in the Tanakh later on in the Nevi'im that can be understood as references to those places, certainly in the Gemara. But only Egypt is referred to as a curse to be in. And we've just learned 2 places where we're told never go back. And as a curse upon you, he will even, not only will he wipe you out and tertiate you and leave nothing of you, but you'll be sold back into slavery in Egypt by a route which I told you, Dafka, you should not see again. Of all the ways to go back to Egypt, the worst way would be driven back from Israel into Egypt, which is going to be a big opening. It's a loophole. We're going to learn what we don't have this time for this week. We'll learn next week. We'll get as much as we can in tonight. But for the rabbis that struggle with how can Jews live in Egypt nowadays? How can Jews set foot in Egypt, even to negotiate? If it's a ban in the Torah, the loophole is going to be you're not allowed to go into Egypt from Israel. You have to take a detour. So Rambam, by the loophole, could go to Egypt from Spain. Why? Because that's not going to Egypt from Israel by the way which you went. It's not the king of Egypt of Israel sending people in to get horses and bring them back. It's not traveling in for a treat and a tour. It's a different pathway, Spain. So that's the idea of how they come up with a heter, a loose, I just said the word a minute ago, an opening in the law that you can get through, a loophole. Okay, but that's the worst possible of all the places to find yourself, even to be in Berlin, is to be in Egypt. Why don't Jews feel that way today? Because Jews don't know. Now that you've been in my class Thursday night, the 60 or 80 or 100 or so who learn it, we'll have 100 Jews in the world now who actually know that that's the worst curse imaginable. There you shall offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves, but none will buy. Can you imagine? You will be so worthless in the punishment of the tochacha, people won't even buy you as slaves. All right. And these are the terms of the covenant. You follow my laws, the Brit, you follow the laws of the Torah, you'll be blessed with everything you can imagine. Not. These are the terms of the covenant Hashem commanded Moshe to conclude with the Israelites in the land of Moab, in addition to the covenant which was made with them at Chorev. I don't want to get into a side story of Judaism and Christianity, but this is a very major, just for your brief postscript, there's a very major fork in the road that distinguishes and that separates Jewish theology from core Christian theology. Saul of Tarsus, Paul of the Christian Bible understood from chapter 28, he took this to mean that anybody who violates any of the 613 laws of the Torah will go to hell. Because it says, Im lo tishmor lasot et kol divrei Torah zot. If you do not observe all divrei HaTorah, the words of this Torah, hazot, hakatuvim b'sefer hazeh, that are written in this book, if you fail to observe faithfully all the terms of the Torah that are written in this book, Saul of Tarsus, Paul of the Christian Bible, understood that to mean that is what is going, everything I've just taught you. The full curse. So if you don't eat kosher, you're going to hell forever. If you don't keep Shabbos, you're going to hell forever. And even lighter, a man who uses razor to completely be clean shaven. And the woman who does, everybody's going to go to hell if she doesn't like Shabbos candles. Paul said it is impossible. He's right. This party's right. It's impossible not to do a sin. Moshe Rabbeinu apparently did a sin. He wasn't allowed to Eretz Israel. Everybody does something wrong. So Paul said it's impossible, and therefore everybody's going to hell. And therefore God in his mercy brought his only son who died on the cross. And if you have faith that he died on the cross and you're washed in the blood, therefore you can get salvation. And that's Christianity. And we're not there to get into a long discussion. Judaism explains that's not what it means. The word Torah does not literally always mean the 5 books of Moses. Torah also means teaching. And just the other week, I sent out on a Friday weekly parsha. I explained that the word Torah means teaching. A teacher is called a moreh, if male, and morah, if female. Torah is teaching. It happens to be that we call the 5 books of Moses the Torah because it's the teaching. It's the mega teaching. It's also called Chumash. Chumash, because from the word Chamesh, because it's 5 books. But the word Torah also sometimes refers to a subunit of the Chumash, a particular Torah. They talk about like the philosophy of Zev Jabotinsky, the Zionist nationalist. It's referred to in the writings as Torah Jabotinsky. Jabotinsky's Torah. Doesn't mean that Jabotinsky set forth his own theology. He wasn't religious, unfortunately. His great failing, despite his being the greatest Zionist of the modern era, he was blind to how you've got to be religious or you're missing the underlying point. But they refer to Torah Jabotinsky, the teachings of Jabotinsky. Teaching. So it's saying here, whoever does not follow, Judaism explains it, whoever does not follow this teaching, namely chapter 28, if you fail to observe faithfully all the terms, not of this Torah, of this teaching that are written in this book. Now, how many books are there in the Torah? 5 books. And within the Torah, we don't have time for it now. It's discussed this in Gemara Baba Basra, I believe Daf Yud Daled, folio 14. It talks about the writing of the writing of the Torah, how Moshe Rabbeinu took dictation from God and scroll by scroll by scroll. And then there's another opinion, he took all the dictation at the end before dying. We don't have time for it now. But the understanding is that it's saying that in this scroll, this teaching here in chapter 28, anyone who violates here is going to sustain all this punishment. Not that someone's going to, but it doesn't mean you're not going to go to heaven, not have olam haba. But if you break some of these laws that are discussed in chapter 28, you're going to lose it, unless you repent. And teshuvah, we just talked about it the other class. In the context of David and Melech, it's unbelievable how the 2 classes keep overlapping. We talked about the way of repenting in Judaism. Recognizing the sin, regretting the sin, taking upon oneself not to do the sin again, zivat achet, abandoning the sin, and in fact not doing it when the opportunity arises, confessing to God, not to the rabbi. But we talked about all that. Okay. But the bottom line for tonight is that you can't go to Egypt. This brings us to Leviticus 18, Vayikra Perek Yudchet. So what's so terrible about going to Egypt besides the fact that God said you can't, which is all you need to know. You don't really need to have a reason. If God says that's the answer. People sometimes ask me, they ask other rabbis, why can't we have meat and milk? So we have answers. Why can't you have pork? So we try to. But the real honest answer is because God said so. End of story. Nowadays, how do they say it? Period. Stop. That's it. So instead they say, well, in the old days, they didn't know how to cure pork, and so you could get trichinosis. And nowadays, good. That's the reason. So now they don't get trichinosis. So why can't we have pork now? Once you start getting cute with all these scientific reasons, why do you have to go to mikveh? Well, in the old days, they didn't have indoor plumbing, and so people would get diseases, and this way would be, yeah, but now they have indoor plumbing. And they have bidets. I don't know, they have soap, they have So the simple answer is like, why do we keep Shabbat? Well, and we need to rest, and it's good for your soul, and it's good one day a week not to have TikTok and Instagram. And no, that's not it. God rested on the seventh day, end of story. So in the same way, the reason that we don't go back to Egypt, you know why? Because God said so, end of story. Nowadays, everything is gray. That's what the therapists explain. There's no black and white, and you have to explain everything to your children. When I grew up, Mommy, Daddy, why can't we turn lights on Shabbos? Because you're not allowed. And that worked. It worked. Look at me. I became an Orthodox rabbi. All I needed to know is because you're not allowed. Sof pasuk, it worked. Nobody had to start explaining, well, electricity, it's like fire, because electricity can start a fire. And look at Pacific Palisades, the electric lines come down and it starts a fire just like at Havdalah. And no, you're not allowed. End of story. Then you want to, and then boy gets older, girl gets older, would like something deeper. So you send up to your Sheva, let the rabbis explain it. Leave me alone. I'm your father. I'm your mother. So chapter 18, we get an insight. Why? God says to the Jewish people that the Egyptians were perverted. They had perversions. And for that reason alone, you, a holy people, must not ever again live among them. That's why I arranged you would live in an isolated canton of Goshen and not live among them in their cities when you lived there in Ramses, Pithom and Ramses, and you are never to go back there. You should not live among the Egyptians and not live among the Canaanites because they have perversions. Why not? My rules you shall observe. What kind of perversions did they have? They had perversions. Not allowed to sleep with your mother, and they did. Not allowed to sleep with your sister, and they did. You're not allowed to sleep with your son's daughter, and they did. You're not allowed to sleep with your mother, with your mother-in-law, and with your stepmother, and they did. And you're not allowed to sleep. And all of these things that you're not allowed to do, that the Torah makes very, very, very clear in absolute terms. There's just no other way to understand it. And the Torah says it. And that's why. The Torah says it. And that's why you don't live in Egypt. Because the Torah says it. Black and white. Okay. Where does that leave us in America? It's a good question. First of all, the Torah does not say don't live in America. And America has not yet formally, it's in transition. And America has not yet become so perverted and morally corrupted. One day it says this, and the next day the President of the United States gets up and says, on the record, this country recognizes only two genders, male and female. So obviously, he's not speaking for everyone, but at this moment, he's speaking as the leader of America. What will be tomorrow? The country is in transition, and we don't know which way it's going to go. Okay, but the one thing we know is we don't belong in Egypt. Rambam, until now on Thursdays, I've been teaching you Mishneh Torah of the Rambam, the codification of Jewish law. Rambam also created another book, Sefer HaMitzvot, the Book of Laws. He lists the 613 laws of Judaism. In the one we learn most of the time, that everyone who learns this learns most of the time, is the Mishneh Torah. That's the codification of the laws of the Chumash and the Gemara. He calls the laws from all the different sources, rearranges them in codification by subject, dry and to the point, cutting out all the conversation that appears in the Gemara. So it doesn't say, Rabbi this said this, and Rabbi that said that, and Rabbi this explained, answered, and he asked the question, he gave it. It's simply bottom line. He takes the bottom line of all the discussions and he codifies it, so the subjects are all on one topic at a time. Here what he does, in Sefer HaMitzvot, he lists the 613 laws in the order they appear in the Torah, in the Chumash. He kind of codifies it by taking out conversation. he sticks only with the Chumash and doesn't get into the Gemara. So it's not only dry, but it's a little bit incomplete because you need the oral law, the Gemara, to give full meat to the text of the Torah, without which you can't really grab all of it. But that's what a Sefer Mitzvot is. And he breaks it up in two parts. All the positive mitzvot. A positive mitzvah is a mitzvah thou shalt do. You shall eat kosher, I don't know. You shall honor your parents. And then there's negative laws. You shall not violate Shabbat. You shall not make a fire on Shabbat. That's a negative law. You shall honor your parents. You shall not curse your father. You shall not eat pork. You shall slaughter properly an animal. So he breaks it up in his negative commandments, mitzvah 46. Mitzvot lo taseh, mitzvah memvav. English too. I might run into the English. Let me just start. Shehishirnu mishachon mishkon bim eretz Mitzrayim liolam. Mitzvah 46, negative laws of the Torah. Jews are forbidden to live in Egypt forever. Kadesh lo nilmod mimaseim, so that we will not learn from their evil ways, their corrupt ways. V'lo nelech b'darkeim hamagunim, and we shall not follow their corrupt, perverted ways of living. V'hu amro lo tosifun lashuv b'dorecha ze'od, and this is what it says in the Torah: you shall not again go in this path. Uchavar nichpal ashara bazeh shalosh pamim, and in fact, this warning appears 3 different places in the Torah. We just learned. Amru b'Gemara, and later in the Talmud, we haven't gotten there yet, it says, B'shlosha mekamot is here, Hekuf b'hei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, et Yisrael, shelo lashuv b'Mitzrayim. There are 3 shlosha places that God warned the Jewish people not to return to Egypt. B'shlosha pa'amim chazru, and nevertheless, 3 times subsequently, Jews went back to Egypt anyway. Uvahem nanshun, for each one the Jews got punished. Amnam hashlosha mekamot echad mehem asher secharanu. Now, what's true is, of the 3 places Rambam says, one of them is the one that he specifically warned us. Vasheni b'derech asher amarti lecha lo tosif lerotam. The second is when he said, don't go the same direction. Remember how I showed you on the map that it's not, it could be a loophole not to go from Spain. Specifically, you shouldn't go from Israel. So, Vashlishi amar reitam Mitzrayim hayom lo tosif lerotam. And the third one, God said, don't look at them. So, in only one place did God say you shouldn't go back there. The second, there's a loophole if you go from a different direction. The third is a loophole about whether you look at them. Aleph Ayin Pei. Okay, so it's a tradition we have that it's a warning not to go. Now it's taught in Gemara Sukkah, it's taught in the Talmud, Daf Nun Aleph Amud Bet, in folio 51b of Tractate Sukkah. There's a whole teaching that there was one of the greatest Jewish populations of all time was the Jewish population in Talmudic times, which is way, way after the time of the Torah. Right? There's the Torah, then the Jews go to, under Joshua, enter the land of Israel. There's the era of the judges, the era of the kings, Saul and David and Solomon, and the division of the country into 2 kingdoms, and the exile, and going to Babylonia and coming back, and the rebuilding, and the Maccabees, and a long, long time till the Talmud. And only in that time did there suddenly develop an extraordinary Jewish community in Alexandria. And you're not allowed to live there. Alexandria is in Egypt. And yet it became like Borough Park in Brooklyn, Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Where's there a major Jewish community in Gola, in exile? as I said, Flatbush, Muncie, Pico Robertson and La Brea in Los Angeles, and that's the United States. There are Jewish places in London where they know Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh, and so on and so forth, places that are known to be Brookline in Boston. So there were places that became Jewish centers, not allowed. Alexandria was that. And rather than go through it here, I'll show you the Gemara itself. And how could it be that the borough park, that the biggest Jewish community in the world outside of Israel, it was a gigantic, thriving Jewish community like Borough Park in Alexandria, which is forbidden, asur l'shevet. It was forbidden to live there. Although mutar, so Rambam says, now keep in mind, he has some splaining to do. Why do I say he has some splaining to do? Because Rambam was living there. See that? Rambam in the 1100s is compiling Sefer HaMitzvot. He's got to explain. He had been in Spain, ended up in Egypt. What's he doing there? What's he doing there? He has the humility to say, of course he does. He's got humility. He's a giant. He's beyond a giant. We can't fathom what the Rambam was. He understands he has to give us an understanding what he's doing there. I'm nothing compared to the Rambam, but I have to explain why am I not in Israel right now, which I would be and that was actually my plan if it hadn't been for my lung transplant. And I won't go into a whole long thing, but those who know my story know how that changed my life in terms of being in Israel right now, the interplay of the lung transplant, the doctors, and the COVID. But got to explain it. What am I doing here? So he had to explain it. There is a loophole that if you're going there only for business, you can't make a living in Israel. God forbid you're in a field you cannot make a living. But you can make a living in Egypt. I don't know, what do they make in Egypt? Egyptian cotton. Somehow you've got a friend, you've got a contact who can get you into the Egyptian cotton business. And you can't make a living. But you can there. You're allowed to do it. There's a loophole if that's the only way you can make a living. Or, for example, if you're going somewhere else and you got to go through Egypt, you're not allowed to set foot in Egypt. So if you're not allowed to set foot in Egypt, how can you go in Egypt? Because you're going from Israel on the way to some better place for a Jew, like Libya. Oh, Libya. I left my heart in Libya. Or Algeria, or Morocco, or Turkey. All those wonderful other places. Lo aleinu v'lo aleichem, as they say in yeshiva. Shem yishmerenu misa, Rahman litzlan. The biggest three, for those who know those terms. So anyway, Rambam says, God forbid you, the only way you can make a living. All right. So anyway, and in the Yerushalmi, in the Jerusalem Talmud, there's the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud. Amru Bishalmi Sanhedrin Sof Perek. It says in the Jerusalem Talmud, Liyeshiva I atachozer, aval atachozer leprokmatia v'lechbod sha'aretz. You're not allowed to voluntarily go to Egypt to make it residential, to decide that's a nice place to live. They have a lower tax rate, and they have less government interference. So I want to live in Egypt. No, you're not allowed to go there to live. But atachozer leprokmatia, if you're going meantime to make a business, meantime, v'lechbosha aretz, or as part of conquering land, as may end up happening with this whole Gaza mess, for that you're allowed to go in. All right, we have time for a little bit more meantime. Let's go to that tractate I mentioned, and let's learn about Alexandria. We'll continue more next week, Mitzvah Shem. Sukkah 51b. And because of time, and I really want to get some of this in, Folio 51b. Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, great famous teaching of Rabbi Judah. Again, to put the placement, he's going to talk about the greatness of the community of Alexandria. And again, to place it on the time scale, on the timeline, long after the Torah forbade us from ever going back to Egypt. Number one, you're not allowed to, like in the splitting of the sea, the way you see Egypt now, you'll never be allowed to see him again. And God's saying that when you have a king, the king must not bring people back to Egypt, whether to get horses or anything. And number three, God's saying that the biggest penalty imaginable is to be driven into Egypt, the place I said you'll never go back, nevertheless to be driven there. And the Torah is telling us why Egypt is so bad, because of its immorality. And Rambam listing it as, and everything we just read about it. So with all of that, and it's Sefer Mitzvah, the Gemara tells us that long after the Maccabees, that long after King David and Solomon and all of that, so long after the Torah said don't go to Egypt, there was a thriving Egyptian community, that the people of the Talmud, one of the Talmud people, the Mishneh was around the year 165 of the Common Era. The Gemara, which comments on the Mishneh, is around the middle 300s, the 4th century. That's when Ravina and Ravashi put together the Talmud. So by then, long after the Chumash, there was a thriving community in Egypt, which, by the way, ultimately was wiped out. So let's learn it. And we'll learn it in English for time, and we'll take this up more next week. And this is all in the context of ethics and values in Jewish war, that we have a specific eternal understanding about Egypt. It is taught in a Braita that Rabbi Yehuda says, remind you when Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, when Rabbi Yehuda, the leader of the Jewish people, was gathering together all the teachings at the time he put the Mishneh together, and necessarily redacted and couldn't put every last thing he gathered in because it would be too many volumes. But it still carried great power. So those learnings that he couldn't fit in, but that had same value, are called Braitas. It's taught in the Braita, the Rabbi Yehuda says, one who did not see the great synagogue of Alexandria of Egypt never saw the glory of Israel. I mean, what's the greatest synagogue in America? There's a big debate. They like to say Temple Emmanuel, but that's a Reformed temple, so that's a zero. That's a zero. Maybe it's the best organ in America. What's the best synagogue? Of all places in Tennessee, there's a synagogue called Baron Hirsch Synagogue. And they like to brag they're in Western Tennessee. And they like, it was Tennessee, Memphis. And they brag they're the biggest Orthodox synagogue in America. And I spent a Shabbos there. When Ellen Zichron Livracha and I were traveling through the United States, got to be in 28 of the 50 American states for a year. It was like incredible. And we spent time in Memphis, and it was known all over America that the biggest synagogue in the United States is Baron Hirsch Synagogue in Memphis, Tennessee. So we spent Shabbos, and I asked the people, what makes this the biggest? It didn't hit me. We were looking around. Ellen and I were looking around. We just didn't see what makes this the biggest. It's okay, but we've been a bigger. And it was one of the crazy, we waited until Kiddush after the davening, and I was talking to people at Kiddush. And I was saying, excuse me, I'm Dov Fischer. I come from Brooklyn. I come from Los Angeles. And we look forward to this. What exactly makes us the biggest? And everybody had a different opinion. Yes, we're the biggest. We have the largest membership of any Orthodox synagogue in the United States. Okay. Another guy says, yes, we're the biggest. We have the most square footage of any synagogue in the United States. Orthodox. I went to another guy who said, our synagogue is the most expensive synagogue to have been built in the United States. And I'll never forget the fourth guy. Fourth guy I went to, I said to him, please just explain to me. My wife and I were trying to make heads of what makes this the number one synagogue in the United States. He said, were you here today for the full davening? I said, yes. He said, as you know firsthand, our rabbi delivers the longest sermon every Shabbos than any synagogue in the United States. So anyway, the synagogue in Alexandria, the Gemara is telling us, was the biggest synagogue in the world, or was that he who did not see the synagogue of Alexandria never saw the glory of Israel, not referring to the land of Israel, but to the people of Israel. They said its structure was like a large basilica with a colonnade within a colonnade. At times there were 600,000 men and another 600,000 men in it, twice the number of those who left Egypt. Even more than Trump would like to think appear at his rallies. It would be like 1,200,000 people. In it, there were 71 golden chairs, corresponding to the 71 members of the Great Sanhedrin, each of which consisted of no less than 21,000 talents of gold, and there was a wooden platform at the center. You know, how do you hear? They had no microphones. How do you even hear if you go davening? I'm going to catch Shacharis or Shacharit or Mariv at 120, 1,200,000 or 600. How are you going to hear the davening? You're there to say Kaddish, God forbid. How do you know when to say Yeheshmei Rabbah? The sexton of the synagogue would stand on the platform in the middle with the scarves in his hand. Get this, imagine this. There's 600,000 or 1,200,000 Jews in this extraordinary synagogue. It's a stadium times stadium. I can't even contemplate it. And in the middle, there's the chazan on a platform with scarves in his hand. And because the synagogue was so large and the people could not hear, they couldn't hear the davening. Why would you go to a synagogue where you can't hear the davening? Because it's like a thing. It's like a thing to go to that synagogue. When the prayer leader reached the conclusion of a blessing, requiring the people to answer amen, as you know, if somebody says, Baruch Hashem al-Kalam, Bori Bria Galfen, Baruch Hashem al-Kalam, Shakal Niyabid, Baruch Hashem al-Kalam, whatever, Machai HaMeitim, Baruch Hashem Machai HaMeitim, Baruch Hashem al-Kalam, Rofei Choli Amo Yisrael. So after each bracha, you have to answer amen. But you can't hear what he's saying. The sexton would wave the scarf. He's waving the scarf. Amen. That's how big it was. What were the Jews doing there? Not allowed. And the members of the various crafts, it became like a place to network. When you have 1,200,000, you can't hear what's going on. In a shul with 30 people, half the time you can't hear what's going on. Everybody's talking. Unfortunately, my shul, I'm proud, youngest shul of Orange County, no one talked for 2.5 hours of davening. Shabbos morning. We never had it. We had one guy couldn't keep his mouth shut. I really mean it. We expelled him from the shul. No one in our shul talks. That's the glory of setting up your own shul where you're the Rav, and you don't care how much he donates. Can't keep his mouth shut? Out. Go donate it somewhere else. Most rabbis can't do that. But what a thing. But when you have 1,200,000, it's a real problem. If everybody just whispers, it's going to be louder than a hurricane and an earthquake. But on the other hand, nobody can hear what's going on. So they would sit in networking. All the gold workers would sit in the gold craftsman section. All the diamond workers and all that, and they would network like the Jewish Federation. You join a section of the Federation, the furriers, and you give a little bit of money to Federation, and you donate some money for the people displaced by the LA fires, with the Florida earthquakes, hurricanes, and you make deals for your furrier business. So the members of the various crafts would not mingled. Rather, the goldsmiths would sit among themselves, and the silversmiths with themselves, and the blacksmiths with themselves, and the coppersmiths with themselves, and the weavers with themselves. And when a poor stranger entered the shul with the 1,200,000, he would recognize people who plied his craft. I'm a tailor. Gewalt, what am I doing here? Oh, wait a second, there's Muttel the tailor. There's Muttel Comsoil. There's the tailor, Muttel Comsoil. So you run over to say hello to Muttel. He just got his sewing machine, and he would turn to join them there. And from there, he would secure his livelihood. And he'd sit there, I'm a tailor. I'm trying to get into business. Well, by now, Baruch Hashem, I'm Muttel Comsoil. They're writing a musical about me. Do you ever have scraps of fabric that you don't use? Well, after I make my dresses I always have scraps. Would you give me the scraps? You want my scraps? I need to get started. Okay. Come by on Monday. Come for the scraps. I'll give you the scraps. In fact, I just got a new sewing machine. Would you like my old sewing? And that's how I do work. As the lively, the members of his household. So everybody would work in that craft after depicting the glory of the synagogue. The Gemara really said, Abai said, all the people who congregated in that synagogue were killed by Alexander the Great. Oh, see, he wasn't so great. How do you like that? A shul with 1,200,000 Jews, or 600,000 Jews, the glory of the Jewish people, how did they say it? They said, one who did not see the great synagogue of Alexandria never saw the glory of Israel. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishalo Ra'ah, Diuplustin Shel Alexandria, Shel Mitzrayim Lo Ra'ah, Bichvodan Shel Yisrael. That they were so great, they were the greatest in the world. So what happened? Kulhu Katlinhu, Alexandra Smokton, Alexander of Macedonia, namely Alexandria the Great. All of them were killed by Alexander when he conquered Egypt. Gemara asks, what's the reason they were punished and killed? What could Jews possibly have done to bring them on themselves such a holocaust? It's due to the fact that they violated the prohibition with regard to Egypt. As it says in the verse in Deuteronomy, you shall henceforth return no more that way. Never again. Lo tosifun l'shuv b'derech ze'od. You're never allowed again to go back there. The inhu hador asu, and they, notwithstanding, went back to Egypt. They established their permanent place of residence in Egypt. When Alexander arrived, we're wiping down, we're clear, oh, it's 7:40, so I have to stop. Give me 2 more minutes and I'll stop. When Alexander arrived, he found them and saw that they were reading the, well, let's even see. I'm going to stop right there. So what we've learned tonight, let's just quickly see if we could summarize a little. I mean, no, you know what? Let's leave it alone completely. I made you promise that we're wiping out for now. So what we have learned in the context of ethics and values of Jews at war is that there's a history going back to Egypt, the same Egypt that started the war in 48 and 56 and 67 and 73. And we're going to learn more about it. And we're going to learn a little bit about Nasser. And we're going to learn, continuing from this, to the modern era, that the halakhah in the Torah is we're not allowed to go back to live in Egypt. And yet there were Jews who went back to Egypt, and they built the single greatest Jewish community in history in exile, and God destroyed them. Sent Alexander the Great, who was good to the Jews in Eretz Israel. The Gemara elsewhere, we don't have time for it now, when he came to Eretz Israel, he was good to the Jews. He was so good to the Jews that not only did he not destroy the Beit HaMikdash, but he destroyed the people who attacked the Beit HaMikdash, the Kuthians, the Samaritans. And that's why it was decreed that generation, everybody named their sons Alexander. And that's why to this day, you'll be in shul, some guy gets to the Torah, his name is Yehoshua ben Alexander, or Moshe ben Alexander, or Alexander ben Avram. The name Alexander, a whole generation took the name Alexander. That's what he did for the Jews in Israel. But in Egypt, he wiped out the Egyptian population of Jews, because we're not allowed to live in Alexandria, and we're not allowed to live in Egypt. We'll continue more, God willing, next week on this subunit of Jews at war, ethics and values, places we're allowed to fight, places we're not allowed to fight, places we're allowed to go, places we're not allowed to go. I want to thank everybody for being here, and have a wonderful evening and a Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.